All right, welcome, friends. Thank you for joining us. I am just so blessed and excited to have somebody that I've only ever written to and from over the last 4 or 5 years, and that is the person of Felicia Murrell, who is joining me from somewhere in America. Hopefully, you'll tell us where you're from. It's early morning here and afternoon in the US. Felicia, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
David, thank you for having me. I am delighted to finally get to meet you face to face in this virtual space.
For context for the listeners, Felicia moonlights also as a copy editor, and she was recommended to me from Brad Jerzak. Actually, he said, I said, I need somebody to edit, and he said, Felicia's the best in the business. So you helped me edit several of my books, and I know you've done the same for some others that I've worked with. I think you've worked with Tara, who I had on a podcast a few weeks ago as well, Tara Boothby. And so I know that there are far more hats that you wear than copy editing, but your feedback was so encouraging and valuable, and the way that you held space for my words. And so I have been sort of blogging and writing on and thinking about not just sort of the stages of life that we come into, but also in a little Facebook post a couple of weeks ago, touched on this idea of, listening and listening well. Now, you and I both work in spaces. Vocationally, where listening is paramount to what we do. And I thought I'd love to get somebody on for a different perspective, perhaps a more, you've spent more years in this space than I have, to talk about listening and the ways in which we can become better listeners. So, Felicia, that's why I've brought you on. I have pitched you forward some questions around that. But to begin with, could you give our listeners some more context of your own background? Also, please tell us about the recent book that you have published as well.
Okay, I think I can do some of that. I wanted to start with a quote to kind of frame deep listening. Now I'll go back and add context for you. But this is a quote by someone when I was getting my certification in spiritual direction. Her name is Reverend Elizabeth Rector, and she used to be the executive director at Still Point, which is a nonprofit organization here in America. And she wrote, as we sit with another and listen to them on their spiritual journey, wisdom is not for us to give, but more for us to name or notice when we hear it. And if we don't hear it in the moment, we find a place to sit with the unknowing. When I think I need to be the bearer of wisdom to another, I have stopped doing the deep work of listening. And I'll come back to that. But the context of really why Elizabeth's words resound so deeply within me. I think growing up, particularly as a Black little girl in the American South, there was an adage that was true for a lot of families. And that was that people would say children are to be seen and not heard, meaning that the conversations were to be had by adults, not kids. So, but in our family, because of the trauma that you write so beautifully about, dysfunctions, things like that, children were not just, it wasn't that you weren't just heard, you also were not seen, right? And so for me growing up, invisibility became a place of safety. And so the world that I existed in was a world of words. I loved to read, and I would get lost in books. And but that meant that the natural innocence and progression of childhood that comes with asking questions, that comes with a natural curiosity, that even comes with being seen when your voice is released into the world, those things weren't natural for me because
Mm,
I found safety and being invisible. Um, you were less likely to get yelled at or to get punished or to get told to do something or, whatever, when you made your presence known. And so I found safety in invisibility. But what that meant as I grew into adulthood, it meant that I did not know how to be at home with my own voice or at home with my own thoughts. It also meant that as I began to sit in solitude and stillness and loved, healed those broken places and began to restore agency to myself and empower me through my writing and my speaking and my presence and my being, the passion that came alive in me was creating space and holding space for people to let their words hit the air, to listen to others, to ask the questions. And so through adulthood, I have been a life coach, I've been a pastoral counselor, I've done, inner healing modalities. But as I look at it, it has all been about the healing and flourishing, being inviting people to freedom, to have that place. And so I come back to Elizabeth's quote of my role, whether I'm parenting, whether I'm being a companion, a spiritual companion with someone, or the role of deep listener is to listen. It's not to tell you what your journey is through life or to control that or to be the authority of it, but it's to listen enough, to listen well enough so that you can create the space inside of your own journey with spirit to hear the deep wisdom within. And so even in getting to the recent book that I wrote is called And the Restorative Power of Love in an Either or World. And the whole idea behind writing this book was just a longing in my own heart to, I was longing and missing the voices of elders. I
mm,
was in a place in my life where I was really wanting to flesh out some things that were stirring within with someone that was holding wisdom and I'd reached out to several different women, hoping that someone would have time, and no one seemed to have time. And so I was sitting inside of that, the longing for guidance, the longing for mentoring, the longing for the wisdom of elders. And I realized that I could sit with spirit and hear the voice of spirit. But 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now, there was going to be another woman who was also longing for that same wisdom. And
mm,
so I felt inside of that an invitation to kind of put some things um, down. And so Anne
mm,
became that place of those inner conversations, those musings between spirit and I, through poetry, through essays, through just all the words on paper. So that's what came in the form of Anne, the restorative power of love in an either or world. And that's kind of my trajectory from childhood into the woman I am now, and why the passion for being with people, companioning and listening.
mm. Thank you
Yeah.
for, yeah, sharing, and that lovely thing you opened with, the quote by Elizabeth Rector, is that, yeah, poignant name, obviously, like very apt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, tell me, tell us about companioning, if that's a new term for some people, because I work in aged care chaplaincy, and that is a large sort of approach that we're encouraged to take
Yeah.
with the people that we serve. Um, if no one's heard of that before, tell us about companioning, what it is, what it's, and perhaps even what it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably a great way to start is with the negation. So some people call it spiritual directors, and honestly, um in my faith tradition, I was kind of really formed and influenced in a non-denominational, charismatic evangelical space. And so spiritual direction wasn't something that I was familiar about or knew about. Um, as I started getting into contemplative spaces in the early 2000s, centering prayer, of course, was one of those entry points for me.
Mm,
And centering prayer was founded by Father Thomas Keating, who is Catholic. And
mm,
so, inside of learning about mystics, learning about contemplation, um, a lot of Catholics have spiritual directors, or that was where
mm,
I was first introduced to this language of spiritual direction or companioning. And
mm,
essentially, it is not mentoring, it is not counseling, it is not life coaching. In companioning is about bearing witness to or being
mm,
with someone. We always say that companioning is like a triangle. That spirit directs each session. Um, and you are there to bear witness, and then the directee or the companionee is there as a participant. So you have two participants, and spirit is the conductor of each session. And
mm,
inside of that, some people come to direction. They might have a question of discernment that they're trying to
mm,
flesh out. They may have questions about their own spirituality and its evolution. They may have relational questions. Um, Sometimes, if you're like me, you may not know exactly what you have. Um, but the journey is to create a container of space where what's inside can hit the air. Um, Another Catholic priest, uh, Ignatius, has the examine.
mm,
And so some people can companion looking at consolation, desolation. What's the blessing that you've seen? And then what are the points where you feel like Spirit is inviting you to learn and grow? Those kinds of things. But for me, companioning is about creating space to be a holy listener. And one of the things that the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh said, one of the deepest things that we can be is a compassionate listener, to bear witness to another. And so that's where I find myself in the role of in the role of companioning. It's just the listening.
yeah. A little off the script of questions, but I think it's a good something comes strongly to mind is this. You talked about you grew up in this to be, you should be seen and not heard, and then you walked through this journey of I found my voice. I have a voice. I have things to say. You entered the ministry. You raised 4 children. You can't do that. Not saying anything or not feeling like you should say lots of things. And now you've moved to this space that might seem like regression, but is actually, I think, a kind of progression.
Yeah.
Um, you laugh and nod there. Tell me what comes to mind.
Yeah. I actually love that. As you were saying that, I was thinking about a circle and how life is cyclical. And I think it's so interesting because, and I'm sitting reading some of your work, so it's like at the top of my heart right now, and it was really pulling
Mm,
a hug. Um, but even in my own journey, I'm sitting in the crux of having been born in the 70s, right?
mm,
And so I grew up under the impression that as a woman, my the successful mark in my journey was to find a man, get married, have a family, right? That's what success looks at. And I can remember going to school, going to university, not wanting to be married, wanting to get a job, have a career and a life for myself, that sense of independence, right?
mm,
And meeting my husband, who is absolutely my dearest friend. We've been together for 30 plus years. And we've lived a lot of lives inside of that. But our life has been one that's very traditional. I was a stay-at-home mom. I homeschooled our kids. Doug was a military officer and then resigned his naval commission and went into full-time vocational ministry. So we
mm,
started ministry after several years of being in church leadership. he goes into ministry as a pastor. I have all the dutiful roles of pastor's wife and what that looks like and all of those expectations, right? And then in 2000, when we come into a revelatory kind of experience of love, really loving us, not just this is the structure of something, but the experience of something that really transformed our hearts and our lives, we end up moving from the kind of church structure we were in to planting a church together, he and I. And in our church plant, one of the things that we did, at that point, I had been kind of teaching Bible study some. And so really the finding of my voice happened when I encountered love experientially, right? And I was teaching Bible studies and doing all these things. Doug and I plan a church, and now we're pastoring together. He preaches a Sunday, I preach a Sunday. We share fifth Sunday duties together. And I'm moving into this more expression of freedom and agency that looks different than this is what's expected of you.
Mm,
It's how am I partnering with spirit inside of this? But I have had this formation of history maker, world changer. These are all the things you do where you still are the center of that to make the name of Jesus famous, right?
mm,
And so in 2012, one of the things Spirit asked of me was to hand to Spirit everything that I believed to be true about God, everything that I ever believed to be true, to hand it to Spirit, that Spirit would sift it and give back to me what was truth, capital T, true. And my yes to that I felt was a one-time thing, but really it has been the formation of my life. And so inside of the handing over of everything that I ever thought to be true, what's landed back most is the dynamism of relationship. How do I live and move and have my being inside of love? What does it mean to give myself away to other? What does it mean to be the truest expression of myself? And when I can center down, as Howard Thurman says, into the truth of my being,
mm,
um, then the alignment of that is that I am most present and most fully alive in my quiet, right? When I can just make room for someone else to express who they are, to have a safe place to listen, to have a safe place to process, and for me to be able to lean into spirit and point out to them the movement of spirit in their own life, which is really what direction and companioning is about. Um, but it's not about getting my point across or my sense of wisdom or what God has done for me. It's can you see how spirit is operating in your life? And so in that way, I don't necessarily see it as a regression. I do think it has been more of this circle, this coming of home to the fullness of myself in love that brings me
mm,
to the point where I still have the agency of my own voice through writing, but I'm very content that I don't have to force my opinion or my way or even my own journey on someone else. I can be there to support them as they discover the movement of spirit inside their own lives. And that's true
mm.
of my kids and with those that I get to have the privilege of companioning.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Lots there. Well, you touched on your kids at the end there. You have four adult children now. Um, how does companioning and this journey that we've just explained, this coming full circle, inform the way that you parent? And for context, as you and maybe some listeners know, I'm drafting this manifesto on this term I call decentric eldering. And what you mentioned there is kind of like, and I can't use the word goal because, or progression, because that all these things have these performative connotations. But I'm just going to say we a phase and a season that I think not enough people are either hear the call into or are able to move into. And part of that, as you opened with, is this moment of like, where are the elders in my life? and who has done this well. And we sometimes, I think, we look for somebody who's done and said something incredible, but it's usually not. It's those who have been with us as we've discovered something wonderful within us, because by this stage the fruit begins to ripen. And you don't want to be the tallest tree in the forest, and the competition's over, but it's very hard for a lot of people to get there. So I'm wondering how that journey has gone with your kids and some of your background. As you've said, you were very full on in the ministry space, in the schooling space, in the homeschooling space. It was obviously a strong connection. You spent a lot of time with your kids, and then as we've done as children, as we see our children do, and as I see a big lament of people that move into your stage of life and say, my kids don't want to talk to me, they don't want to hear what I have to say, is this deep lament that always comes out. As one, if I ever talk about eldering maturity, they say I'm old, but no one wants to hear what I have to say. Yeah, can you speak into those areas for me? What comes to
Yeah.
mind?
Yeah, I think with the kids, Doug and I have had some very foundational kind of principles in our parenting. We both grew up in different kinds of patterns of dysfunction. But one of the things that we realized early on is that even though we wanted to have a healthy family unit, we did not have a picture, we did not have a mirror of what that even looked like. We
Mm,
didn't know what was normal, we didn't know what was healthy. And so the first thing that we had to do was gain some tools, right? Gain some skills, some relational skills, some conflict skills, some emotional regulation skills, all of these things. Some of that we've since moved away from, some we still stay with. A very foundational one for us is that a pillar of healthy relationship is unconditional acceptance. And by
mm,
unconditional acceptance, what we mean, one is that I know where I end and where you begin.
mm,
I manage me and you
mm,
manage you. You're
mm,
100% responsible for your part of the relationship, and I am 100% responsible for mine. And inside of that, I manage myself toward you, believing the best about you, that
mm,
your character defects don't control that or create mistrust, suspicions, or assumptions, that I will intentionally lead with honor and curiosity, um, and unconditional positive regard toward you.
mm,
That's the way that I maintain my heart connection. So the bridge of relational capacity is always there between us. And it also means inside of that, that I'm very, very good about owning what's going on within me, within my own interior space. So if my kids do something off the wall, I will say like, okay, that scares the, you know, bejeebers out of me. Um, I'm very good about being honest about when they're doing something crazy that's scaring me, because my natural inclination is when I get scared, I want to control. I'm going to double down on control and try to wrest the reins of your life. And I recognize that about myself. And so I have
mm.
to be honest out loud about what's happening within my world, because that
Yeah.
invites the place for you and I to be in relationship, right? Um, Freedom matters to me. And so with my kids, as they have moved from out of my home into adulthood, I want them to have the freedom to be who they are, to live their life. Um, but love governs the structure of our freedom. I tell people that freedom is like a river that flows, and love is like the river banks. And so when I think about my actions toward someone that I am in relationship with, how I govern my freedom is to not splash it over the banks of love, right? So what does that look like? I could be free to do something crazy, but doing so means that it's going to cause a rupture or harm in my relationship. So
Mm,
does my ability to do something outweigh how
mm,
much you mean to me?
mm,
And so so one of the things that was important to me as the kids got older was to move from the parent-child hierarchy of mama tells you what to do, you do it, you don't have a say, all of those kind of power dynamics, to
Mm.
you're human, I'm a human. We're here to remove that sense of hierarchy to being in an equitable relationship. And one of the ways I had to do that was say, I I want you to decide how much you are in relationship with me and what that looks like. And it's not that I'm not going to show up for you. I will always do that. I'll always be present. But I'm also not, I don't want you to feel obligated just because we have this hierarchical kind of thing of I'm the parent, you're the child. I want
Yes.
it because you want to. You know, what does it look like now as adults to be
Mm.
adult to relationship?
Yes.
And I'm not bearing every burden, every concern, you know, all those kinds of things onto my children. But there's a mutuality that exists that maybe from 0 to 18, when they're in a home and you're trying to discipline and do formation and those kinds of things, that doesn't in some way. And so there's that. What that means with all four of them is that's very different.
Mm.
Have some that, you know, we have a weekly FaceTime. All of my kids are in different places throughout the US, but some we have a weekly FaceTime and we talk every week. For some, we text often, but we might talk once a month or once every other month.
Mm.
For some, there's a lot more intentionality in the connection. As a family, one of the things that we always do is we spend 1 week together out of the year, um, 7 to 8, 9 days that we are all together. And it is interesting to come back into a family unit
Mm.
as, but how my heart toward my kids is this: who you were when you were in my home for 17 years before you went to university is completely different than who you are as an adult. And it's important to me that I know and see who you are today.
Mm.
And whatever of who you are today that you want to share with me, I want to receive. I want to say yes to that. And I don't want to try to relate to you from a familiarity of something from so many years ago from when you were, because I know that I've changed, you know. And so even in that, we've had to turn back toward the kids and ask for forgiveness for some things we made, some things we said, some parenting decisions. And we've had to say to them, some of those things probably are not the best for formation moving forward. But as an adult, now you know you're responsible for your journey. And so whatever we can offer in the way of wisdom or in the way of conversation, we're also here for that. But we believe in them surrounding themselves with other adults who also are
Mm.
voices of wisdom to companion them, you know.
I wonder how many people listening are have parents and they're like, I wish Felicia was my parent because my because the dynamic remains this parent-child relationship for eternity, this hierarchy, as you said, instead of meeting adult to adult. I remember years ago doing the Elijah House ministry training, and somebody put that on a chalkboard in the video. That's how old the video was. And it had PAC on one side and PAC on the other side, you know, two columns, parent, adult, child. And then they drew lines and they were like, what's it look like for you? And they had said, you need to meet adult to adult. And they also reminded us that is up to you to just do your column. You can't make your parents treat you like an adult. You can just meet them as an adult. And sometimes that was an education, adult to parent, to try and drag the parent down to adult. And sometimes it was the other way. And sometimes, as you'd know, Felicia, it was inversed, where the child, it was a pseudo parenting or parentification, that the child had actually parented their immature, perhaps addicted parent their whole life, and live with this deep sense of responsibility. So thank you for sharing that, and for sharing your journey. I love that you mentioned that you had to circle back you had to say, look, I'm sorry for this, but also that you just honor the amount of connection and interaction and the frequency and the type that each person does. And this idea of an annual holiday, I think, is lovely. I have one question. Do you guys pay for that, or is that like a joint thing?
No, that is our gift to them for the
Yeah.
holiday. So yeah,
Yeah,
that,
lovely. That's
yeah,
good.
Doug
I
and
like
I
that.
pay for that.
And
So
how long have you been doing that? Because I know a few families. There's one family in particular I know. They're in ministry. They have a good number of kids, I think five or something, and every year they go away on holiday at this time. And so Facebook over the last sort of decade has this like, here we are again, same place, same hotel, but now their kids are grown up, they've got partners, they've got kids, and it's seems like a beautiful ritual and practice. How long have you been doing that for?
we've been doing it since 2007. So one of the things that
Wow.
happened with Doug after transitioning from military into full-time vocational ministry, he went through a period of time where um, essentially he had went about 6 years without taking any length of a sabbatical. And
Mm,
he was at probably really beyond the point of burnout. Um, and needing to have some significant days. And our realtor who had sold us a couple homes, helped us sell a home, she and her husband owned a timeshare at a beach and essentially told us, it's no one is there occupying it from before Christmas to up to New Year's. And if you'll like pay the monthly maintenance fee, you can have it for all that time. And so that was the first, we were there 11 days and it just was like, it was beautiful. We created this tradition that our family has called Junkathon. We don't do a lot of junk food type things, but on Christmas Eve, we do a movie marathon and we have a junkathon. So it's like Doritos and chips and popcorn and chocolate and all kinds of things. And we put all
yeah.
these books of snacks out and we watch about, 4 or 5 movies. We used to go into the night, but now all of us are aging. We start at about 5 or 6 to do that. But we just and so what we've done since 2007, generally we're at a beach or a lake. We do go to different places.
Mm,
This past year, our eldest daughter just had our first grandbaby. And so since the baby was so teeny tiny, we all went to Dallas, which is where they live. And
mm,
rented a home that was really around the corner from my daughter and her husband's house. And we all, had our Christmas holiday there and the
mm.
family was together. But we have been doing it, so I guess 17 years now. And it's just been, um, for the most part, I think we've only had maybe 3 years where someone was missing. Everyone,
Wow.
like, the intention is we're not going to miss this. This is the time that we plan, that we set aside to all be.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
It's yeah,
And one
beautiful.
thing I'll add, David, we were
Please.
talking about is Doug and I turning toward the kids and having
Yeah.
to forgiveness. I will also add that I was the child of the immature parent. I was the child
Were you?
who bore the responsibility of parenting.
Mm, mm,
And that was a lot. And so even dealing with my own process of the false sense of false responsibility. But one of the things that had to happen, both of my parents are deceased now, but one of the things that had to happen specifically in my relationship with my mom, I will never forget reading Matthew 18, which is the story about forgiveness with the king, and
mm,
being invited to see myself not as the servant who needed forgiven, but as the king. And so when I have that posture or I'm the king, I
mm,
realized that my mom did not have the capacity to repay me. And I kept showing up as that
mm,
girl, wanting to be loved, wanting to be seen, wanting to be noticed and held, and to have care and affection that Bell Hooks talks about from my mom. But finally I had to realize there was nothing within her. She had no capacity to give me the thing
Mm,
I most wanted. And I kept coming at her, holding her on the hook, expecting something, really demanding repayment for something that she didn't even have to give me, right? And once I realized that she did not have the capacity to mother me or to parent me in the way that I desired or that little girl within me needed, I was
mm,
able to let her off the hook, to tear up that IOU, to set her free, and then to be in relationship with her.
mm.
Um, the way that that spirit was showing me was would really love her the way that she could receive love, and to do so without dread, without duty, without a sense of obligation. But this is just love loving you through me. Even when I could not say that in words, I could do it in action. But one of the things that happened inside of that, in tearing up that IOU and getting to the point where I realized she didn't have the capacity to give that to me, it opened up space within myself for the spirit of
Mm.
love to reparent me and to heal those wounded places within me.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Mm. It's common. Hey, it's more common
Yeah.
than we think, and it's subtle. And I remember seeing portions of it. It's usually not an entire thing, but there'll be areas you realized that you had judged your parent as being incompetent, usurped their parenthood, and walked into that role, or you were asked to be in that role. We always had this story of the uh, young sort of 7-year old standing with his mum at his father's dying bedside. His father was a cowboy and had an accident in the cattle yard, and the mother's there, young boy on the hip, on a by her side, and a baby on her hip, and dad pointing to the young boy and said, "Hey, you're a young man now. Look after your mum and your sister, okay?" And that was his last words. And then the presenter says 2 people died that day. A young boy
Yeah.
died early and was told to be a man, a parent, in fact, and the father died as well. And we see that a lot, and I think saw it a lot post-war as well, just through the trauma and the death and everything there. So it's something that I think we're still recovering from. Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I even in my mom's own story, she was the oldest daughter. She was
Mm,
responsible for of a single mom, and she
mm,
was responsible for taking care of her two sisters and the house, while her mom worked. And so
mm,
that was just ingrained in the way she was. But I think also by the time she became the adult in her own home, that little girl within her that just wanted to be taken care of started peeking out more and more that
mm,
I don't, I just think that there was something there. Like, I don't know if I can bear the responsibility of one other thing. What my soul really longs for is to be taken care of. And
mm,
I'm not sure if we really understand the way our shadows uh,
mm-hmm.
come forth when they are not nurtured and tended,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and it's also something to consider.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the internal family systems. One of the phrases that really speaks to me is all parts are welcome and all parts
Mm,
are sacred. And so because I have studied and taught and administered so many different inner healing modalities
mm-hmm.
when I was inside of a Christian faith structure, but most of them are all about fragmenting or cutting off something bad or something that doesn't belong.
Yes.
And the thing that I love about IFS is that it's the welcoming of all, that there's
Yes.
a place that we come to a symbiosis of sorts, a harmony with ourselves, in ourselves, where we can hold the whole of us.
Mm,
And people don't realize when we start talking in Christianese about the tree of the knowledge of good versus evil, it's not just evil, there's also good. So now we're parsing the binary. But when we
yeah.
look at the tree of life is an invitation to wholeness, right?
Yes.
And what does it look like to be to hold the truth of my being, to
Mm.
live wholeness, to live from wholeness, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. I was I did training in and was delivering heart sync, which is similar to IFS, but with this, Jesus component. So it was the most beautiful and profound modality to experience, and then also to sort of be a practitioner of, and yeah, bouncing off what you said there, this thing of these parts that people would think are demonic and God hates, when they were included, loved, and they would meet love, and say,
And in
you're
that sifting
tired.
of,
Yeah. You look really tired. Well done. Thank you for protecting Felicia. Thank you for being there. Thank you for doing these things. What is it that you want us to know? And gee, it was profound. Yeah, it would just, it's the
yeah,
transcending and including, right? It's this
yes,
idea of
yes.
everything actually belonging, and that belonging having its own sense of power. And one of my poems, Longing, which is probably going to be in the new book, you have this phrase that everyone has a longing just to belong, which is simple,
Wow.
but it just is this. Everyone has this intrinsic longing to belong. Every part
Yeah.
of us has that same way, and we'll do that in what we'll play whatever role we can. Yeah, yeah,
That is,
even the silent and invisible role.
yeah. That is so profound. And the sifting of truth. One of the things that Spirit said to me, because again, that with that charismatic Pentecostal, everything is demonic. Like everything is,
Yes.
you know.
Cut it off.
And,
Yeah.
I remember even the first time I was going to hear Father Richard. We were living in Albuquerque, and I was going to the church where, at that point, he was still doing speaking one Sunday a month. And we were getting ready to go into the church where he was doing his homily. And as I'm about to cross the threshold to go into the church,
Mm,
I hesitate. And all of my upbringing that said Catholicism is demonic was like right there at the forefront. And I
mm,
had to take a deep breath and go, God is in this space too, to go in the door. But in that sifting, one of the things that Spirit said to me was, Felicia, in order for something to be perverted or profaned, it had to be sacred to begin with. And so,
mm,
what I'm asking you to do is to see with the eyes of love, to remember that which is sacred, to reclaim and redeem that which is sacred. And yes, some people have chosen to pervert or to profane something, to work with something in a mal energy, but
mm,
that doesn't mean the nature of that started as perversion or started as something, profane. Go back to original blessing, go back to the goodness which is.
mm.
And I so appreciated that because it kind of pulled my hands away from the tentacles of fear that was causing me to see everything as bad or demonic or all of that kind of language that had been given to me to not
Yes.
be in relationship with certain things.
Yeah.
Um, so that's very important to a sense of belonging too, because I think if we other something or we demonize it,
Mm.
it becomes a block from the
Yes.
belong, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Both of you miss out. Mm. Felicia, one of the questions I'd sent through, and I think this would be great to pitch this to you, is uh, why do you think some people are just lousy listeners?
why do I think some people,
Are lousy. They're just poor listeners. They can't listen. They turn up and they want to be center stage. They just have not cultivated that ability to not
yeah,
just companion, which I think is kind of the next step up, but at least just shut your mouth. And do you know?
yes,
Because you and I, if we work in these spaces, you listen to people all day, and it takes enormous capacity. Um, and sometimes, even in a casual session, you setting at a dinner somewhere, you come home and you think, wow, that was like a 95-5 split. I talked 5 words, they were all questions, and they took 95% of the time. And I find myself having to go, all right, decenter that, you know, you held space. But part of me, which still belongs, Felicia, and is longing to belong, said, "How come you didn't ask me about me? You like, do you know? You're laughing now because you know what that feels like. It's just, what about me? There's this thing in you.
I'm
So
laughing
we
because
write poetry and books that people listen, but yeah.
I'm
Why do you
laughing
think
because
that is?
it absolutely drives my husband crazy, David. Like I mean, it literally drives him crazy. But honestly, as you asked the question, the image that came to me is the Great Wizard of Oz. And I
Mm.
think about um how in the story of the Wizard of Oz, you have this wizard who's doing this whole big projection thing, right? There's this
Yes.
grand wizard and it's all the bells and whistles and the flashes and all of that. And when the curtain is pulled back, you have this little scared man, back there. I'm
Mm.
gonna say boy, but a man back there.
Mm.
And and sometimes I think that projection of centering in that way, the nonstop talking, almost it's almost a cry of fear that I am scared that if I don't control the narrative that I want put forth, that you'll see me for who I am, or you'll see the places in me that feel like lack, or you'll see some deficiency in me. So if I keep talking and I control the narrative of what you see and what I offer, I get to decide what you think of me, right? And I have this thing that I um that's really weird for me. And I'll just share very vulnerably.
Yeah, please.
I'm not a theologian. I
Of
haven't went to
course.
seminary. I don't have all of these things. And I'm very honest when I'm in spaces that I'm not coming to those spaces as that. The most that I can offer people is what I know is I have a pointed before and after. I was a certain kind of way before love touched my life, and it wasn't a good way. And all my years in church and all those books that I read and all those things, none of that made me a better person. Love changed from the inside out. Love changed me.
Mm.
And everything that I can offer to anyone, myself, the world, the beyond human world, is because of love, right? That's all that I can offer. But when I am invited into spaces with these people that have all of these degrees and all of these things, sometimes it is honestly intimidating, right? And if I'm not careful, I can find myself trying to posture, to
Mm.
position myself so that I feel better about myself to alleviate the sense the sense of intimidation that's
Mm.
on blast within my heart space, right? And and sometimes I'll do it and I'll go, and when I'm finished, I'll go, why did I do that? Like, what was that about? And I realized that my own sense of inadequacy, because I don't have the CV that would say, yes, give her the microphone. Yes, invite her. Yes, listen to her. That makes me be an expert that someone would, take their wisdom. Then I start feeling intimidated. And in the quiet, what love reminds me is I've asked for none of that. All I've asked is for the truth of your being, in the words of our good friend, the
Mm.
truth of your being to match the way of your being.
Mm.
Right? And that you would dance with me in this universe in truth and freedom and compassion and understanding and the expression of love that is yours to offer, because that really is wholeness. That is life. When we talk about life and life to the full, if everyone can get whole enough and free enough to dance with love, participate with love in their own unique expression, oh, what a world it would be. And so I think some people get loud maybe for that same thing, for that intimidation, the sense of inadequacy, the fear of being found out. I,
Mm,
imposter syndrome is real and it manifests sometimes with bravado as much as it does the recrimination and the self-deprecation.
mm. Anything else come to mind there? I love that. Does anything else come to mind?
I don't think so.
All right.
Yeah.
Final question as we sort of wrap up is you opened with your sort of confession. I looked around, where are these elders? What when I talk about elder, being an elder or eldering, as you might be a parent and parenting, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah. I love I love the question and I think it's the intergenerational piece. Um for me as a little kid, one of the things I love most and even as an adult, I love listening to um in the South we would say old people's stories. Like I
Mm,
loved their sharing of the past of and those were places when the walls would come down because of a lot of stuff. They were very protected and very guarded. But in the when we're shelling peas on the porch and they're telling stories of old, and I loved making myself small enough to gain um to really glean from the wisdom of what they shared in those and it's why I volunteered with Meals on Wheels because it allowed me to, again, be with elders, to go and to give them space to have someone to talk to for a little bit because a lot of times they are alone. So when I think of eldering, I'm thinking of the points of connection to both past um, and future in the present, that we are all links in this universal chain, the sharing of wisdom, but also the being with
mm,
side of that. And there's so much that you are breaking open in this moment that feels real and true about acceptance more than anything. Because a lot of times when we're not ready to accept our age, to accept our maturity, to accept even the lessons that life has handed us, right? To not be ashamed of things, but to glean the wisdom of the lessons that have come from these things that we've lived, to be able to offer, whether in writing or in poetry or in conversation or in relationship and just presence and being with people, not forcing ourselves on other people, but
mm,
just with, to be the mirror. One of my heart tugs that I love about eldering is getting to sit with younger people and being a mirror so that they don't feel
mm,
weird or strange about their experiences, about things that are happening in their life, to normalize our humanity through
mm,
existence. And I think even more than having someone tell me, um, what I wanted was just to be seen. And I think that to be at a place that I can turn in my life and offer to someone else, you are seen, you are
mm.
held, and you are known, and you are witnessed. That's what eldering is.
I love that. Thank you. It reminds me of a quote from Bio Kamalafe, who, I don't know if you're familiar with Bio's work, but he
Yeah.
says an elder is not human, and he goes on to explain that uh, great oak tree
Yeah.
is an elder and has been known in and perhaps animistic background, and certainly in First Nations cultures and so on. Here in Australia, for example, we have one of the oldest First Nations cultures, Indigenous cultures in the world here, uh, that they would consider some of what we would call nature or wildlife as elders, that they can be spoken to and they'll always be present.
Yeah.
and they'll listen and they'll absorb.
One of the practices that I give to my directees, I talk about how all matter matters. And I
Mm,
suggest to them to go out and find a tree, find a rock, find a mountain, to find water, and to sit by it in stillness, and to ask of that tree, that rock, that mountain, that water, what secrets do you hold? What would you like to say to me? And to listen to the voice of the tree, the rock, the mountain, the water,
mm,
that we understand that wisdom, that life is not just in human form. I think sometimes we get very almost superior, dominant in our thinking about us as humans and our
absolutely.
existence with consciousness. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah,
Yeah, we are, with a technical term, as you know, is anthropocentric. There is this obsession that we have. And I love Bill Plotkin's work where he says, as you move on to these stages of eldering and elderhood, you care for the more than human. You realize that your soul is nature and that you're part of this, greater landscape ecologically. Um, Such a profound thought, and thank you for sharing that. And I love that that's part of your spiritual direction. you know, it's and all the research, I work at the university part-time, and so you hear about things that make sense, and we've been practices we've been doing for a long time, but even telling the kids to get out of the class, university students, get out and just go sit by something in silence and quiet, and then come back, and how do you feel? No one comes out far more stressed, far more, the overwhelming research just shows that this is all good, you know. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and what a beautiful eldering practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when earthing became a thing, when people would take
Mhm.
off their shoes and put their bare feet on the ground. And for years, even as a kid, that's something within me that I now call spirit. I'm have always been a big feeler, taking in the energy of things and people around me, taking in concerns for the world, and I can get filled up with all of it. And sometimes
Mm,
it's not good, and my insides would hold it. But there's something within me taught me to go into green space and to pray into the earth. And what I mean by that, I would literally take my hands um, and lie prostrate in the ground, face to the ground, and I would open my mouth and hum into the earth or yawn into the earth. But I was sharing all the things that had filled up within me with the earth. And there's something within me, which I now call spirit, would say, um, the earth is our mother and the earth can hold your cares, right?
beautiful.
And so the sharing that, I mean, from a little person learning to
Mm,
share my being with the earth, and that the earth could sustain us, and that this is a partnership to take care of. So I
mm,
love the turning toward and the inclusion that I can see this and hold this with care, right? I can
yeah,
with this.
lovely. Yeah, the term "get back to nature" is so
It's
so
loaded.
dualistic. You don't get back to it. You are nature. You know,
Yes.
and you felt that early. That's so beautiful, so beautiful. Felicia, is there anything you would like to share as we close, besides letting people know where they can find yourself and your services and your latest book?
Yeah. Uh, I am available on my website, feliciamurrell.com. And my latest book is on all platforms online, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, shoptheword.com, bookshop.org. It's called And the Restorative Power of Love in an Either or World. I'm also chopping up all the time on Facebook. I can be followed there, and on Instagram at hello Felicia underscore Murrell.
Thank you.
Thanks
And
for
I'll
having
put all those in the show notes for people to find you too. Yeah,
me.
lovely to be with you. And thanks again for
Thank you for the invitation, David.
companioning, sharing. Thank you.
Yeah.